This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, and Bloomberg Originals.
And a very good afternoon, everybody. Yes, indeed, across Bloomberg platforms. This is Thursday, June 11th. June 11th.
No, it's June, but that's okay because you're thinking about tomorrow and the SpaceX IPO.
I am. But what I'm really thinking about is how 29 minutes ago, kind of the top of our show changed, because that's when we got a headline crossing the Bloomberg. President Trump cancels a planned strike or strikes against Iran tonight, saying the time, the place of a deal with Iran signing to come soon. And as a result, we are seeing stocks and treasuries move up. In fact, stocks rallying, and they are pretty much at their highs of the session.
Yeah, also seeing oil plunging close to 4%. Brent traded below $90 a barrel after the president's comment. Should note, we are still above $90 on Brent, back up there now. WTI at about $87 a barrel. Still up about 50% year to date, and a far cry from where we were before this conflict, but these are having market-moving implications.
And I will say the president also said on a deal with Iran that the final points were approved by all parties. Now, having said that, devil always in the details, because we have been, it feels like, maybe not at this point, I don't know, but it just feels like we have been at places before where we thought there was some ending in sight to the U.S. war in Iran. But let's see. We're going to talk about that with our own Michelle Jamrisko in just a moment. We're going to head to D.C. In the meantime, just a quick check on the trade for you as we bring up the numbers. We're up about 1.33% on the S&P 500, up just shy of 100 points, up almost 700 points on the NASDAQ 100, Tim. That's good for a gain of about 2.5%. You know what's back in favor?
The stocks?
Yeah.
I knew you were going to say that.
In a big way.
Well, speaking of what's in favor, Wall Street traders gearing up for SpaceX's historic debut. We are all over that, not just this hour, but over the next 3 hours right here on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, because once again, we can't get enough SpaceX, but institutional and retail investors seem not be able to get enough of those shares that are out there.
It feels like it comes
IPO.
Into every market conversation, especially also when it comes to kind of sentiment in the IPO market and all of that. Hey, we're also going to talk a little bit about Europe and the European Union's role in the world with the United States. This as the ECB raised interest rates for the first time in almost 3 years. We're going to get to that with the former European Commissioner for Competition, Margrethe Vestager. She's going to join us. Actually, not join us. She talked with our Stephen Carroll over in Brussels, so he's going to join us to talk to us about that conversation.
I think a lot of people out there might be a little tired, especially if you are in the tri-state area. Maybe you're a Knicks fan. Maybe you stayed up late last night watching the game like I did. It is a fun time to be a sports fan. That comeback last night means they are one game away from the first title in 53 years. Not just that.
What?
We got the World Cup kicking off, too.
I know. There's so much going on. It's a sports-a-palooza. We're going to go there. Hey, let's get you going. Let's get a check on that trade today as stocks move up to their best levels. Here is Charlie Hellett.
Hi, thank you very much indeed. Got to begin with a developing story headline right now on the Bloomberg Professional Service. President Trump has tapped Jay Clayton to lead the top U.S. intelligence office. That headline right now on the Bloomberg. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all surging, all higher. The catalyst, as Carol pointed out, coming down roughly 1:30 p.m. Wall Street time. That with a headline saying that President Trump has canceled planned strikes against Iran tonight. Stocks took off. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all surging. S&P 500 index up 84. Where we stand now at 73.50. That is a gain of 1.2%. The Dow up 740. That's an advance of 1.5%. NASDAQ up 1.6%. The NASDAQ 100 index up by 2.1%. The Bloomberg Mag 7 index, little change, but higher by 0.1%. The SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange's semiconductor index, is now surging by 5.2%. All of this with the VIX holding right around 20. Your 10-year, 4.48%. The 2-year, 4.08%. And the 30-year at 4.97%. Gold, $41.41 the ounce, up 1.7%. West Texas Intermediate crude, $87.96 a barrel, selling off by 2.2%. Barrel of Brent holding above 90 at 90.66. Brent crude down now by 2.6%. So again, recapping, President Trump canceling planned strikes against Iran tonight. President says a time and place for an Iran deal signing will come soon. Again, the S&P up now by 1%, WTI 87.93 a barrel. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Carol and Tim, lots going on. We got you covered. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And it can change in a heartbeat. All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You're up to date on the trade at this hour. In the meantime, it is about 9 p.m., a little bit after in the evening in Iran. And as we are about to mark the 15th week of war between the United States and Iran, just moments ago, we've got already an about face today from President Trump. We've kind of done a 180, or he has, I think it feels, and I think it's safe to say. Here's what he put out on social just about 29 minutes ago. Based on the fact that discussions with the Islamic Republic of Iran have been brought to the highest level of Iranian leadership and approved, I have, as President of the United States of America, canceled the scheduled strikes and bombings against Iran this evening. Discussions and final points have been in both concept and great detail approved by all parties involved, including the United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Turkey, Pakistan, Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, Egypt, and others. The naval blockade will remain in full force and effect until this transaction is finalized. Time and place of the signing to be announced shortly. What's interesting, this is coming after words earlier this morning on Fox from President Trump that U.S. attacks on Iran would continue.
Yeah, there will be more bombing tonight. It'll be a bigger, more powerful. They're finished, but the papers, the media refuses to write it. They're finished. We can walk in there tomorrow. We could take soldiers. I don't want to have boots on the ground, but if I wanted to, we could put a small group of soldiers and take over the whole place. They're finished, and the media is crooked. They're just like our elections. The media is crooked.
That, of course, is President Trump earlier on Fox this morning. Let's head to Washington, D.C., and to Michelle Jamrisko, Bloomberg News White House and National Security Editor in the Bloomberg News D.C. Bureau. Michelle, war on, peace deal on, hard to make sense. What is going on, and what are you folks hearing as to, is there really a peace deal in place?
Well, you're right, Carol, that we've kind of been in this mode for some time, and you're right to feel like this is familiar. You know, Washington has a way of recycling tropes in times like these, and Groundhog Day is certainly one that we continue to draw back on. But for good reason. We've been here before where the president is pushing this sort of dual track of semi-contradictory statements where he's saying, you know, yes, there will be more strikes on Iran, and then he says at the same time the negotiations are going well and a final deal is near. That's where we were at this morning. But with this semi-reversal, at least on the strikes front, we're kind of in a similar place where we just don't know yet what will happen next and how true to reality his rhetoric is at this point. So one thing I would caution, you read out in his post, of course, that list of countries that he says have agreed to some framework of a deal and in concepts and in practice. That list has a notable omission, and that is Iran. So we've been here before, but analysts, especially those who have studied Iran, or Iranian historians, Persian Empire historians will tell you this is a civilization, this is a current government and regime that likes to slow walk these things, is fine waiting it out as the president kind of scrambles to try to finish something that he started on a timeline that has gone long past what they initially said it would take.
And I've just got to say, Michelle, I've got a Bloomberg terminal user actually messaging me and talking about a source, and I want to confirm it, but saying Iran and Israel are both denying existence of any agreement. I am looking, do we have, and that's what I'm thinking about, Tim, like, do we have any confirmation from Israel or Iran or anybody else that this deal is real?
Well, you might know better than I, Carol, if you've got the terminal right in front of you, because since I've been sitting here, something may have happened, and we're right to be following. You know, Israel, I'm sure, is very quick to point out whether or not they feel something has ended.
Again, I have nothing confirmed. I'm just saying, like a Bloomberg terminal user who, you know, folks in the market are obviously pulling into different news sources as well. So it's just
and it's a good time also to urge caution, you know, on the sourcing on that, because as you know, throughout the war, we've been dealing with a lot of Iranian state media headlines that have to be kind of verified and also checked against what Iranian officials might say, and then of course ultimately how they might act in response to various developments on this side. And at the same time, we've heard conflicting signals both from the president but from other administration officials as we all try to work out what is actually happening in those talks. And that's a whole other subject too, by the way, that we're going to have to tackle in the coming days if we are actually close to a deal, is that there are a lot of parties involved, and we listed many of them in that post that Trump just put out, and many of them have varying interests in touting a deal is nigh or saying it's not nigh, and things need to be worked out on various sticking points that have persisted throughout the conflict.
Michelle, speaking of sticking points, the nuclear issue, that's the sticking point. I mean, that is the entire reason the president laid out for us earlier this year about why he decided to go to war with Iran. Right. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, is what the president says. What about the enrichment of uranium? Do we have any details at this point about what a deal looks like that, again, like the president says, has been agreed to, by all these parties when it comes to nuclear enrichment?
Well, Tim, I think you're right to point out that that's at the core of this and is maybe the major sticking point of about 4 or 5 major sticking points. We just don't know at this point what might be confirmed, where they might be coming a little bit closer together on the idea of, removing the highly enriched uranium. If you do remove it, where would it go? The U.S. and Iran have disagreed on that point. Iran at times has said they'd be okay with sending it to China or Russia. The U.S. says, no, that's a deal breaker. So either the U.S. would take it or they would send it to some other site that would be acceptable. That's still very much in the air and unclear where they have landed in those negotiations. But those negotiations themselves have been complicated by a number of factors, including the fact that you've got the main decision maker in Iran, the Ayatollah, holed up in an undisclosed location, in a secure location in the north of the country that's very hard to reach, and perhaps is taking, as U.S. officials have said, many days to get messages back and forth, even through the intermediaries like Pakistan, like Qatar, who have been helping out in these negotiations. So there's a lot of complicated back and forth at work, and so we do need to kind of take every message from either side with caution, and just kind of verify whether or not both sides have actually agreed to any one of many sticking points still to be worked out.
Yeah, I mean, who's doing the negotiating at this point? I thought what was interesting, there was a story earlier on the Bloomberg about senior national security officials from the United Arab Emirates and Iran holding a face-to-face meeting for the first time since the start of the U.S.-Israeli war against Tehran, according to people with knowledge of the situation. And I am curious, where's the U.S. position in all of this? Like, who's making this happen? Because there's so much at stake for so many different entities, if you will, for Iran, for the United States, for Israel, for the Middle East region. I'm just not quite where to figure out, who's in charge here and who's driving it.
Well, it's a great question, Carol, and I think one thing we can say for sure is that things have moved beyond where they were in that first round of direct negotiations that took place in Islamabad, however many weeks ago that was. But it seems that, at least on the U.S. side, that they're taking a different tack, that Trump, noticeably and publicly grew impatient with Iran and, has been unwilling to send the likes of Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to any other location to interact with them. But at the same time, Vice President Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio have been involved. On the other side, we're still unsure exactly how those negotiations are happening, but we do know it is a complex set of people involved on the Iranian side. And then, of course, you have other major players, aside from those playing intermediary, like we mentioned, Qatar and Pakistan. You do have, Israel foremost as one party that has been very vocal in all of this and certainly plays a big role in how this thing finishes, when it finishes. And they, by the way, yesterday were reiterating that the Iran war is far from over. So it's kind of cutting against the messaging that Trump wants to promote of a final deal being near, peace being at hand, and no need, at least for now, for those additional strikes tonight.
It's a lot. You keep such great track of it all. Michelle, thank you. Really appreciate it. Michelle Jamrisko, she's Bloomberg News White House and National Security Editor. All right, let's get to the market read on the war, this morning's inflation print, SpaceX IPO. There's just a few things coming at us.
I want to bring in Danielle DiMartino Booth, CEO and Chief Strategist at the research and analytics firm QI Research. She's a former advisor to the Dallas Fed. She's the author of Fed Up, an insider's take on why the Federal Reserve is bad for America. That was back in 2017. She joins us from Dallas. We just talked about the latest back and forth between the U.S. and, well, the U.S. when it comes to the war. Inflation, AI, we've got SpaceX's IPO. Tomorrow is when we expect it to start trading. What, in your view, matters most to markets right now?
Right now, I think momentum matters most to markets. I mean, we're seeing volatility like what we saw in 1999, like what we saw in the year 2000, where we're having massive swings in the markets, whether it's up or down. They're very jittery. They're very skittish, and any headline can throw them one way or another. And I think the fundamentals matter a little bit less than you would think that they should, despite the fact that theoretically Kevin Warsh is preparing for his first FOMC meeting.
We can talk about that in just a moment. I want to talk about inflation, but what is momentum, Danielle, when you've got the stocks up more than 5% today? It was down 3.6% yesterday and down about 2% the day before. It was on Monday up 5.6%. What's the momentum in that?
Well, when I say momentum, I mean to say that right now everything is moving based on a herd. Everything goes up together, everything goes down together, whether it's the Kospi if you're following late at night or the SOX index. But we have to remember what preceded this was the largest run up in the SOX index in the history of its index. So again, I don't know that many veteran investors take comfort in the violent swings that we're seeing in the markets these days. That's more my point.
Okay, so does it? But is it driven in your view by fundamentals at all? Because some people out there would say, "Hey, you're just shaking your head now for our radio audience," but and I saw you say no. But I mean, there are folks out there who say, "Wait, earnings justify these valuations." We'll talk about SpaceX in a second, but what do you think?
Well, I think that people are starting to move away from kind of the Cape Shiller 10-year look back and looking towards forward indexes. We've seen this play out before. We know why it happens. We know how it happens. And I think you have to be very careful about how you perceive the E in the price to earnings ratio at inflection points in the economy, especially when we're seeing equity come into the market in a very aggressive fashion. Now it seems as if there's a race to be the next SpaceX. It seems as if there's a race to get secondaries priced after the market closes. And again, these are all signposts of prior cycles that people who have gray hair like I do, who cover it up, have seen before.
All right. So talk to us a little bit about what might be the next cycle, or is it just a continuation of what we've been in, I don't know, for the last 6 months or so? Because I'm thinking about, 2 days in a row, some hot inflation prints, the pressure that puts on the Fed, the rethink in terms of valuations as investors, certainly on the equity side, think one thing one day and one thing the next, and we'll see what happens with the SpaceX IPO tomorrow. 30 seconds. What is this cycle in your view?
Well, we just had S&P come out with a print of 73 bankruptcies for the month of May. That just hit about an hour ago or so. And we're seeing that play out. There was very little pass through to the CPI yesterday, and then we saw trade services in the PPI this morning drop by 1.1%. That's the biggest decline in 9 months. So I think investors who are focused on the fundamentals should be paying very close attention to the margin squeeze that's taking place right before our eyes, even as transport costs soar. Companies are not able to pass that along. And that is, again, what we saw in this morning's PPI report. Somebody's going to have to shoulder these higher costs.
Somebody always has to pay. I almost kind of wish we were kicking off a new earnings season. Danielle DiMartino Booth, CEO and Chief Strategist at QI Research, joining us from Dallas. We're taking a break. And
coming up next, Europe is finally slowly getting its act together. Bloomberg's Stephen Carroll joins us from Europe to explain. That's next on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily.
Hey, it's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, they're all advancing. The U.S. stock market holding very close to session highs right now. Stocks are surging as President Trump signals that a U.S.-Iran deal is close. The S&P now up by almost 100 points, 73.63 where we stand, up by 1.3%. The Dow holding well above 50,000, 50,700 on the Dow, up 1.6%. NASDAQ up 1.7%. The NASDAQ 100 index, full of big tech names, that index up now by 2.3%. The VIX below 20 right now. We've got the SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index, ripping higher by 5.2% for the 10-year, 4.46%, the 2-year, 4.07%. The 30-year back below 5%, 4.95%, while gold is at $41.51 the ounce, up 2%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 2.8%. WTI 87.56 a barrel. Barrel of Brent right now holding above 90 at 90.31. It is down by 3%. Bottom line here, traders driving stocks higher. Oil fell as President Trump cancels scheduled strikes against Iran and signals that a deal is near. Sources tell Bloomberg retail investors bidding for shares in SpaceX's IPO have submitted more than $100 billion in orders as the potentially record-breaking debut enters the home stretch. Pricing comes later on today, trading tomorrow. Ticker SPCX. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Carol and Tim, what's going on? That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Always is. All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, the European Central Bank, speaking of things going on, the ECB raising interest rates for the first time in almost 3 years. We've got the FOMC meeting next week with Kevin Warsh chairing for the first time. Meantime, ECB President Christine Lagarde warning inflation triggered by the Iran war is widening beyond just energy. Keep in mind, Europe definitely feeling the pain of two wars as the Russia-Ukraine war is now more than 4 years old and counting. And of course, you have the U.S. war in Iran. Even so, Europe seems to be shaking itself awake.
Yeah, as the global order disintegrates and China dives deeper into Europe's traditional markets, EU leaders say the bloc needs bigger and everything to protect itself. Bigger banks, bigger tech firms, bigger defense contractors, bigger investments. Ahead of next week's G7 Leaders Summit, Bloomberg has been speaking to policymakers and investors about Europe's path ahead, as new Bloomberg economics analysis underlines why major change is needed. And yet, can the bloc, Carol, really evolve?
Yeah, it's a big question. Our Brussels radio anchor, Stephen Carroll, Bureau Chief Suzanne Lynch, and editor Corey Bennett have been speaking to figures at the heart of Europe's political and financial decision-making. And Stephen joins us right now. He's co-host of Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, joining us from the Bloomberg News Brussels Bureau. He is also host of the Here's Why podcast. Stephen, so good to have you here with Tim and myself. First of all, tell us about this mission that you and our Bloomberg colleagues have been on and the question specifically that you were trying to answer.
Look, the question we're trying to answer is whether Europe's actually finally going to do something about its economic decline. The warnings have been around for years. Remember that big report from Mario Draghi, nearly 2 years old now, saying that it was existential for Europe, that it made major reforms, integrated its markets more, ramped up investment massively to 1.2 trillion euros a year. And the sense that we've been getting from our reporters around the continent is there was a sense of a shift towards progress on this, finally, and that perhaps we were moving because of the pressures that were coming on the EU from the United States. We know, obviously, the Trump administration has been particularly unfriendly to the European Union, but also the rising competition from China, questions around access to markets, putting pressure on manufacturers here, that perhaps things were starting to change. And we went looking for where those changes might come. And actually, although I know you'll think I'm crazy if I start talking about small details in European policy changes, there are signs out there, and they are small but significant, that things are really changing now.
What are some of those signs that things are changing? Is it more than just Europe doing more of its own defense spending? What is it?
Defence spending is a key one, and it's an interesting example for a model that could be used in other areas in the sorts of things that Mario Draghi wanted the European Union to spend more money on. But I will point to merger rules. This is an area the EU has had a huge influence globally over, reviewing mergers, antitrust law. And the EU said a couple of months ago they were going to start revising those merger rules. And we're already seeing signs of businesses taking notice of this. Deals that in the past you thought might be flagged by regulators. We had a big telecoms announcement in France in the past week. We had a big banking merger announcement in Italy in the past week as well. And these are the sorts of deals that, from a big picture point of view, you want. Bigger companies, more cross-border investment, bigger banks in particular to help for financing across the continent. These are the sorts of deals that could have been a concern to regulators in the past, but it seems that executives have decided it's worth going ahead because they are sensing a changing attitude. The other issue, and it's something that we've covered for a very long time here at Bloomberg, is questions around deeper capital markets in Europe, trying to encourage more of that cross-border investment. Europe's 6 biggest economies have now said they're going to go ahead with this plan, even if they can't get an agreement at a 27 level. That's significant too, because it's considered now to perhaps be a model as to how things get done in this moment. Is, look, you get a big group of countries together, they go ahead, the others can join if they want, but crucially you will start to provide those deeper markets that will hopefully stimulate investment and help to turn around the economic fortunes as well.
You know, Stephen, to be fair, right, and not play as the EU figures its way forward and its position in the world, President Trump upended so many long-standing global relationships. Some say that was long overdue. Others say big mistake. These have been longtime allies, and it impacts not just geopolitics, but it impacts business. When it comes to the EU and the U.S. relationship, you had a perfect voice to talk with. Tell us about your conversation and check in with the former EU Commissioner for Competition.
Margaret Vestager is one of the EU policymakers who's really been at the forefront of some of the most controversial ends of EU policy, competition law being one. She was also part of developing the new digital rulebook, which we know the Trump administration doesn't like either. She was in one of the top positions at the EU Commission until 2024. And I asked her about this question as to whether actually maybe Donald Trump had done the EU a favour by upending this relationship and spurring them into action. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
I wouldn't express it that way because, I'm really sad about some of the very, very negative effects of the Trump presidency. Take the closure of US AID, the risk of offsetting a new AIDS epidemic. So I think one cannot see it like that. That being said, I think it was about time for Europe to realize we need to do better ourselves. The European social contract is at stake here because many people feel that that social contract is not being upheld.
So that's Margaret Vestager, formerly of the European Commission, really putting in perspective the influence that the degradation of the transatlantic relationship has had and how that has spurred, it appears, European leaders into more action on this front, realising that they have to rely on themselves more because they can't rely on one of their most important traditional partners. And she actually pointed to Donald Trump's comments around wanting to annex Greenland earlier this year as being a moment that really seemed to spur a change in attitude, in a sense that actually now Europe needs to tackle some of these long-running underlying problems to be able to provide better protection for the social model, the wealthy influence that it's built up over time. Now, I don't want to get you too excited about this because things happen slowly in Europe at a European Union level. We're in the middle of the discussions on the next European budget, for example. That could be another area where there could be big changes. The ambitions that we've had an update on today don't look hugely different, so that might not be the level of excitement that we want. But the conversations are happening, and there is a sense that we're moving towards something that will result in more European integration and more, as a result, Europeans' influence on the world. Bloomberg Economics was looking at the potential consequences of this as well. They say the path is going to be divergent even further. The European Union will fall further behind the US economically if there isn't big changes made. But if there are, that will arrest, first of all, the decline and actually could see the two economies converge as well. None of that, of course, mentioning AI, which could change everything.
Well, let's talk a little bit about technology and also geopolitics here beyond the United States. You did mention China as another factor that is driving this. And if we think about it from the perspective of EVs, for example, you're not going to find Chinese EVs here in the United States. Not the case for mainland Europe, where you could see, I don't know, Norway, Italy, Spain. In France, you can see Chinese EVs on the roads there. How much of this is about China, and what is it about China specifically that has the bloc concerned?
So there's a couple of issues here. One is that China's moving in on Europe's traditional industries of strength, and the motor industry is a perfect example of that. It's true. I see BYD cars around Brussels. You know, they're more present here in many parts of the continent as well. And it's a question of the EU having to, make this decision about whether or not there are industries that it's going to protect and support. Car making, we know, is extremely politically important in Germany, for example. So will that be an obstacle to try and support those industries rather than necessarily, or to protect, from Chinese imports in that area? The other question is also access to the Chinese market, because it's an important export market for a lot of big European companies as well. And they fear more barriers being put up, which could cut off that very lucrative market for them at a time when obviously now we're going to have trade tariffs with the US as well. So some of those big export markets could actually be closed off to European exporters as well. And that's another way that we could see industries hurt by this complete shifting in the global order that we've seen.
Speaking about the global order and the shifting, I keep thinking about the European Union. We've had a lot of stories, I'm sure, Stephen, on the Bloomberg about the UK. I'm looking at one that was done on June 9th, so just this week, how the UK's options for rebuilding ties with Europe stack up, this possibility of the UK coming back. But I do think about the composition of the European Union. Some have questioned some of the countries and the entities that are part of that institution. How is that going to move forward? How important is that in terms of who's in, who's out, matters in terms of its place in the global world?
Well, that's a really important question too, because of course we have a whole range of countries who've been lining up for years to try and join the European Union across the Western Balkans, for example. But also there's been such a renewed focus on Ukraine's potential membership of the European Union too. And a lot of these questions are tied up with the fact that the way the EU works right now is already so cumbersome. And part of the fear of admitting new countries is you actually make the situation even more complex. And as you add divergent political views from different domains as well, is that there will be a need to give up, for example, the veto that exists in some areas of the European Union. Nobody's willing to have those sort of conversations because it's such a laborious and time-consuming process when there are other big crises that need to be addressed now. I do think it's important to talk about what happened with Brexit, though, because obviously the UK leaving was a blow for the EU. They took a voice out of conversations on things like capital markets, for example, where Britain would have had a lot of influence, and the countries who would like to see greater integration, or for in some cases might want to protect part of their own financial industries as well, have lost perhaps an ally around the table there too. So those alliances have shifted over the past 10 years. New bridges had to be built between countries too. Right. I don't think the UK is going to be rejoining the EU anytime soon, but closer ties does seem to be on the cards.
Hey, great to check in with you. I know it's later there, but so appreciate it. Of course, Stephen Carroll, co-host of Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, joining us from the Bloomberg News Brussels Bureau. He's also host of the Here's Why podcast.
Hey, let's take a look at markets which are driving higher right now. The S&P 500 up 1.3%. A rebound in stocks as oil fell after President Trump canceled planned strikes against Iran and signaled a deal is near, fueling hopes for an end to the war.
Yeah, but the semi-official Fars news agency, citing a source familiar with the negotiations, says Iran has not approved any text for an initial memorandum of understanding with the United States. That crossing just moments ago.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. U.S. stocks holding close to session highs. Volatile day. Stocks are jumping. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. President Trump signaling that a U.S.-Iran deal is close. The S&P up 90 right now at 73.57, up 1.2%. The Dow's advancing 796 points, up 1.6%. The Dow now at 50,714. NASDAQ is up 1.6%. The NASDAQ 100 index up by 2.3% as the VIX falls below 20 and the SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange's semiconductor index, surges by 5.7%. Your 10-year currently yielding 4.46%, with the 2-year 4.06% and the 30-year 4.95%. Gold up 2.1%, $41.56 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude at $87.99 a barrel, reversing course from today's trading earlier, down now by 2.3%. Barrel of Brent holding above 90 at 90.66, down by 2.6%. Bitcoin 63,460, Bitcoin up 2.8%. Intel higher after Bank of America raised its recommendation to buy from underperform on expected growth from central processing unit sales. Intel shares now up by 6.5%. For on-demand news 24 24 hours a day. Subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcast. Carol and Tim, that's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thanks so much. Well, the most watched sports showdown on earth. We're talking about not the Knicks game, but we'll get to that. We're talking about the FIFA World Cup starting today in Mexico City. This year's games hosted in 3 countries. You know that, U.S., Mexico, and Canada. Across 16 cities, 48 teams competing. Tim, that's the most ever.
It comes as the event is being overshadowed by political tensions, conflicts between the U.S. and Iran, driving up fuel prices, creating economic strain for fans. We've got a great duo joining us that knows a thing or two when it comes to the business of sports.
They know everything about sports. With us is Randall Williams. He's Bloomberg News Senior Reporter. He's right here in our New York studio. Vanessa Perdomo Maglione. She's Bloomberg News Sports Business Reporter as well in the Bloomberg News Princeton Bureau out there. Hello, hello. Both, by the way, co-hosts of the Business of Sports podcast, which if you're not listening to, shame on you. Download it because it's really good.
Thank
you.
All
right. You're welcome. Randall, I'm going to start with you. You're right here in studio. Tell us about, this is a big deal. And we've been talking about it, I feel like, forever. It's getting underway.
It has been a large conversation for many months and years, and now we're finally here. We are, as it sits right now, 18 minutes away from not tip-off, but kickoff. Tip-off is yesterday, but it's tremendous. I think that things will really come into effect. We'll feel it on Saturday when the matches really begin, and there's a match at MetLife, and I think the Team USA plays on Friday, right, Vanessa? Do I have that right?
Yeah. They play Friday in SoFi Stadium in LA.
So when Team USA plays, I expect a large crowd. I expect the excitement to kick up. But
Vanessa, how good is Team USA? I mean, help set expectations here. I mean, this is the thing. Soccer, it's globally, it's huge. Here in the US, it is growing. It is big, but we're not even close to the best.
We're definitely not close to the best, Tim. That's definitely correct. But we are better than I think people might think that we are. I think that the U.S. is going to do well. I think they're going to definitely get out of their group. They might have the potential to win the group. And I think if they really, I was talking to Alexi Lalas recently, and he played in the 1994 World Cup. And he really was iterating to me that how important a home World Cup really is. And the U.S. aren't expected to go very far, but I think if they're able to really capture the audience the way that we've seen, in past World Cups, I think that they might be able to do something special and get to the quarterfinals or something like that, or some further than we've ever seen before. I think if they can capture the magic, that's really what's important. They have to feel it.
I gotta say, I want to talk more about the games itself and who's playing and all that, but the cost of the World Cup, like all the things like transportation.
In 1994, it was only $25 or $65 a ticket.
That's not even going to get you onto the New Jersey Transit to get to Metro.
I know.
Combined, by the way.
I gotta say that Dan Hunt, co-owner and president of the Dallas Football Club, he weighed in on FIFA World Cup ticketing prices. Just listen up, guys.
The rollout is a little bit non-traditional, how we would do it in American sports, but FIFA has their way of doing it. And they've gotten some criticism over the prices, and they went back and repriced some cheaper tickets. And what I would say, is there's a market demand for this, and the revenue they generate from the World Cup supports soccer globally. Their initiatives from grassroots to growing the men's game, growing the women's game, all the money associated with prize money, player money to clubs, and just in developing nations and helping the game along. And this is really their pinnacle, tent pole moment that they have every 4 years. And so I know it's a delicate balance, right? You want it affordable for fans because fans make the game, but you also need to be able to have, the money to help support the game for the next 4 years.
I got to say, you could hear that in so many different marketplaces. That's Dan Hunt, co-owner and president of Dallas Football Club. Vanessa, let me just get you to weigh in on that. Is he right? Like, this supports a lot of stuff out there. Does it have to be so expensive?
Look at Vanessa's face.
No, I mean, it doesn't have to be so expensive. It really doesn't. And obviously, it hasn't been so expensive in the past World Cups. I mean, yes, 1994 was a very different time, so we can't really note to those ticket prices. But just even in 2022, ticket prices were, 6 to 7 times cheaper than this. We're seeing ticket prices now for group stage matches that we weren't even seeing for 2022's final. So it doesn't have to be this way, but FIFA wanted to take advantage of the U.S. ticket market. That's exactly what, me and Randall have been having these conversations. That's what they say. They knew resale was going to be a problem, and they wanted to get in on the game as well.
Is resale, Randall, a problem right now? I mean, I've talked to friends who are going. I know a friend, like I've said before, he's going to 5 games: Seattle, New York, LA.
His friend has money.
He told me in 1994, I was 7 years old. I couldn't go to any games, and I vowed then. And he's literally been saving up for years. He says the LA game is much cheaper because they didn't price it right.
Well, I think in terms of what is the right price for these things is if you think of what is the normal first sport that kids play, it is soccer because it is so cheap. However, think about the kids who, let's say, are pre-K to high school. They're going to be relying on their parents. So if it costs you $800 for a family of 4, one individual ticket each, that's $3,200. How many families of 4 are going to be able to pay that? And this isn't just group stage. This isn't just quarterfinals. These are group stage matches. These are matches that feature countries that we might not know or might not know players who are playing for them. Now, just imagine what it's going to cost to see Lionel Messi play.
So, are the tickets selling, Randall?
They are, but it remains to be seen what the audience looks like in these stadiums. There are tickets that are being sold in all these places, and the prices are slowly but surely coming down. And there's a possibility that, shortly before a match, FIFA could slash the prices, and then people flock to the stadiums. That's also something that could happen. But you're talking about FIFA, which is projected to net over $10 billion in revenue. That's a lot of money over the course of less than 60 days. However, at what cost?
I have to say, the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily team has its own soccer expert. It is known as Sebastian Escobar, and he said Club World Cup last year had many empty seats. Can we switch gears? Yeah. Hey, we're going to switch gears. We got to talk about the Knicks game last night, if we can. We are all in on soccer, but we got to talk about it. Vanessa, come on in. Man, what a game. If you went to sleep early, you might have missed and not would have been surprised by the outcome. I don't know. How are you thinking about where we go from here?
Now she's about to just...
First of all, if you went to sleep early last night, you missed history. You missed history last night. It was the biggest comeback, in NBA playoff history. It was absolutely incredible. I was watching from a bar in Queens. It was electric at the end. It was unbelievable. So I think from here, the series is over. And Randall, you were in the building last night.
You were there last night at MSG, Randall.
I was. That was the loudest arena that I've ever been in by far. It was the concourse was shaking. I mean, Mike Breen said it on the broadcast. This building is shaking. No, it was legitimately shaking. And I mean, you have to think a tremendous comeback because I believe it was 76-49 at halftime.
Yeah.
And at that point, the Spurs scored 30 points the rest of the game. A tremendous defensive effort. And I think in this aspect, I'm joking with Vanessa, but she's probably right. When you give up a 29-point lead and then you have to go home and play a team that you haven't beat in your own house, it's kind of over.
Great
29-point lead is that is the most soul-crushing thing ever.
If you're not a New Yorker, maybe if you're not a New Yorker.
Exactly.
Exactly.
You guys are amazing. They're the co-hosts of the Business of Sports podcast, Randall Williams and Vanessa Perdomo Maglione, both Bloomberg News Senior Reporter and Business Reporter for Sports.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
All right, everybody, we're coming up on the last hour of trading on this Thursday. Right now, quick check on the trade for you. We're pretty much at our best levels of the session or just off of it. What does it mean? S&P 500 up 104 points, up 1.4%. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 185 points. That is good enough for a boost of about 1.7% on the Dow. NASDAQ 100 really leading the way on a percentage basis. That average is up 2.6%. Tim, up 736 points. Gotta say, markets really took off after we got that headline around roughly about 1:31 p.m. Wall Street time when President Trump called off any strikes against Iran and definitely saw a much more bullish tone in the markets. Oil's dropped back as well.
I think it's fair to say that traders are also thinking about SpaceX and what happens at the end of the day today and what happens tomorrow. Bailey Lipschultz out with a story just in the last few minutes that it's poised to make history with the biggest ever IPO, launching it into the top ranks of the largest public companies, putting founder Elon Musk on the verge of becoming the world's first trillionaire.
It's pretty wild. I mean, when you think about just the magnitude, the size of this is superlatives. And I also think in terms of the control that Elon Musk has had as this has rolled out, he and his team, in terms of setting the price. So it's going to be fascinating what happens tomorrow. We should point out, can we do a shameless plug?
Oh, we can do a shameless plug.
All right, Tim, me, and the amazing Ed Ludlow, we're going to be walking you through that IPO tomorrow starting at 1 p.m. Wall Street time, so a special edition of Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. We're going to be covering all angles of all things SpaceX and all things Elon Musk.
It's an expected market cap of $1.8 trillion, roughly. It is not yet trading under the ticker symbol SPCX.
But soon.
But that's not going to stop us from talking about some other stocks that are trading already. Let's take a look at some stocks on the move today. I'm Tim Stenovec along with Carol Massar. We are joined by Bloomberg News equities reporter Avalon Purnell. What are you watching ahead of SpaceX's IPO?
Yes, there's so much happening in the markets today, especially after, as you mentioned, President Trump's comments earlier today. Delta Airlines, that's ticker DAL, and United Airlines, ticker UAL, both rising more than 4%. Delta's up 4.5%. United Airlines is up nearly 6%. And that's after President Trump said the final points of an Iran deal are all wrapped up and called off planned strikes on the country. Airlines are obviously taking this as a very bullish signal that a drop in fuel costs could be on the horizon, which obviously also could lift pressure on consumers, but important to still remain cautious since Iranian media says the country has not approved any agreement with the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you pull up, I'm just pulling up the S&P Supercomposite Airline Index. Like, there is a very clear chart that is going to mark a lot of names today, and it's kind of like da-da-da-da-da-da, boom, like up to the upside. Sorry, I know I make noises. But it's really fascinating. The whole group is up about 5%. So you get it. There's a fundamental change potentially. But as you said, the caveat, until we see everything signed on the dotted line, we got to be kind of smart and cautious here.
Brent's still above $90 a barrel.
Right. You know, I don't know. When's the last time you looked at December futures or November futures?
Not recently.
Yeah. But I mean, we know that the trend in energy prices was expected to stay higher because it's going to take some time to really fix everything that has been damaged over in the Middle East. All right, so airlines, Delta, United, you're watching. Oracle, you're also watching as a result of earnings last night.
Well, we thought was going to be the biggest story today. That's ticker ORCL, currently falling about 9.5% right now. That's after mounting data center costs overshadowed that fourth quarter results, which only slightly topped expectations. Important to note that the street was looking for Oracle's results to provide more support for the AI trade, especially since it's kind of grown shaky lately. Instead, it left Wall Street analysts fairly split. Citi pointing out that the full year EPS guidance, which they say was fairly underwhelming on gross margin pressure, while Barclays is saying that the report was good enough, though questions are likely still going to come about that CapEx.
What?
I'm looking at December futures for...
And, I knew I was going to lose them.
It's what happens. Still above $85 a barrel in December.
I mean, we've talked to folks about this.
That is a curve that is not moving lower much.
Yeah, so we'll see, right? Like, let's, takes time to fix all of this and kind of get...
Sorry, Avalon, I also thought Oracle would be the biggest story of the day. Yesterday, I said this is what's going to drive the trade tomorrow. I couldn't have been more wrong.
No, but you could have just said semiconductors, because we talked about semiconductors yesterday, which were under pressure. Today, riding high.
Much.
Yeah,
exactly.
not so much.
I mean, Intel, that's ticker INTC, currently jumping 8.2%. And that's after Bank of America had a double upgrade of the stock to buy from underperform on increasing confidence in Intel's ability to succeed in the AI era. Part of that certainty is coming from Intel's expected CPU sales growth. Just earlier this week, the information reporting that Google will likely rely on Intel for more than 3 million of those AI chips. And just keep on stacking up the different things that are really just the right steps in the right direction for Intel CEO for that turnaround.
Yeah.
Shares are only up 214% this year. So, yeah.
I think what's interesting, too, is if you look at the stocks, it's not even the top gainer in the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, because there's been some other calls, too, right? So I love that you went there, because there's a lot going on in that space. All right, Avalon, thank you so much. Avalon Purnell, Bloomberg News equities reporter, joining us with Stock Movers. Check out our Stock Movers podcast, 5-minute episodes, big winners and losers in the stock market. Tim, you can find it on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere get your podcasts.
Coming up next on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, yes, we are talking about these markets, of course, because the president has canceled those planned strikes against Iran in the latest reversal. But we are also talking SpaceX, set to make history with a record-breaking IPO. Bailey Lipschultz is joining us on the other side, along with Ed Ludlow.
All right, if you're sticking around on TV, as we said, the close coming your way in just a moment. Tim and I continuing on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily.